Hey guys, welcome to the newest edition of your CABMA's Past Presidents webinar. Today we've got a fun, interesting, hot topic to cover. We've got navigating conference realignment. And today we're going to have a couple stories, I'm sure some different experiences, but lots of people interested in what's going on right now in the world of collegiate athletics. My name is Brandy Bryant. I'm a former past president. I was at Stephen F. Austin Peay State University, currently with Teamworks, but going to pass off to you guys to introduce yourselves to some of those people that may not know who you are. Would you guys mind introducing yourselves for everybody? Chris, you want to start?
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. Chris Ikoy, Executive Senior Associate Athletic Director and CFO here at UCLA. I've been here about 10 years, and prior to that, spent some time at Boston College, where I went to school. Sharon, why don't you take it from there?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sharon Bromell. I'm currently not the CFO anymore, sorry. I am the Chief of Staff for our men's basketball program at Georgetown University. Prior to that, spent 12 years as a CFO at Georgetown. I'm loving what I do, and hopefully we've got some good information and can keep you excited today about what's going on in the world of conference realignment. Darren, how about you?
How about that? I love the way we just pass it off like that as a baton by relay. I'm Darren Spees. Good afternoon. I'm the Deputy AD CFO at Charlotte. I've been here 26 years as of 2 days ago, so I'm really old. I spent 7 years at UAB. Prior to that, I don't feel like I've been off a college campus very much since my undergraduate days, graduate days, but love being in college athletics. I was president of the organization 07, 08, so heck, that's even a long time ago, but appreciate the opportunity to share some experiences with you guys.
Well, awesome. Thanks, you guys. So glad you're here. Appreciate your wealth of experience and knowledge, and gonna just dive right in if that's okay with you guys. We connected a little bit before, and each of you have a very unique experience and story behind conference realignment. So if it's okay with you, or I'm going to let each of you share those stories because I thought those are extremely interesting. Both happened in different times of what it was. I don't know that conference realignment has ever happened in the frequency that it's happening now. And some of you had some pretty unique moves and for unique reasons, but would each of you mind sharing your experience and insight into what we're talking about today? Darren, you want to start?
I will go. I am maybe the unique person here that has seen Charlotte in 4 different conferences over my time here. We spent some time in what we affectionately call Conference USA 1.0, which was a collection of schools. Some played football, some did not. We were the ones that the group that did not. So when the conference sort of realigned around the football model, we moved to the Atlantic 10 for a period of time and really sort of featured the basketball programs and what have you, but a very different sort of geography up in the Northeast. Then we added football back, or we added football, and then we got back in Conference USA. So Conference USA 2.0, we were members as we started football, jumped immediately from not playing football. 2 years later, we're playing in the FBS. So an interesting time to sort of speed it up and put it in a blender and go. And then this most recently, this past year, well, I guess 3 years ago, we made the commitment. This is the first year in the American Athletics. So again, another move. We've certainly enjoyed our time in all of these leagues, but they are uniquely different. We did make the decision to make our move to the American when there were schools that moved from that league to others, and we've enjoyed our time so far and have had success. And but it's I think we're probably unique in that we were in a conference twice in the same conference. We in Conference USA 2 different times in my tenure here, but it's been we had great experience in all 4 leagues that we've played in since I've been here.
Thanks.
I can talk next.
Yeah,
Brandon.
yeah.
I kind of feel like Darren's cousin. I'm surprised they didn't come to the Big East with all those moves. But we were basically in that same situation with a little discord between the football playing schools and the non-football playing schools. There was a financial impact that didn't necessarily want to be spread between the football and non-football playing schools. So there was a decision made for the non-playing football schools to separate from the conference. And they actually created their own conference, the New Big East. It was funny because we had heard the rumors, so we kind of knew it was coming, but we didn't know how it was going to come. And Georgetown University happened to be right in the smack of everything, where we ended up doing all the handling the finances until the new conference was actually organized, that we had a commissioner and a staff and everything that needed to run that conference office. So our main CFO, the campus CFO, actually ran the financials until the conference was put back together as the new Big East. It was unique too, in that when they left the Big East, the old Big East, there was no exit fees to be paid because they had permission to leave as a group of 7. And after they left, they brought in 3 additional schools, which were not necessarily Catholic, but they were, well, not Jesuit schools, but they fit the profile with the exception of Butler. But we have Butler, and we have all these basketball playing schools now. We ended up with a pretty decent sponsorship deal as a basketball league from Fox, and Fox was just bringing on their new network, Fox SF1. So we played on FS1, and it ended up being a really good situation for the basketball schools. Hearing rumors again, don't know how far that's going to go. We know for sure that even though Connecticut left us initially, they came back. Hopefully somebody else may come back. Might be nice to have one more school, so we're at 12 instead of 11. It didn't change our travel situation a lot because of the fact that we lost what was 16 schools and we dropped to 10. So it was very, very interesting, the whole situation.
Super unique perspective. Chris, you want to jump in? I know everybody's dying to hear from UCLA.
Yeah, sure. Topic du jour. I think one unique part, Brandy, is I've actually gone through this twice now. So I've been at 2 schools, but 4 conferences. So way back when we were at BC, getting on the other side of Sharon's thing, Sharon's conversation is we made the transition to the ACC, and that was a different, certainly time. It was a little more raw, I think, certainly being a founding member of the conference and those experiences that we went through there as we transitioned to the ACC, not necessarily getting in the first vote, the first go round, and then getting back in. I was in a different role then than I am now, but fast forward 20 years or so, and we're kind of right back in another conference turnover situation, transitioning from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. So that's been certainly top of mind. You can obviously read the ticker and see what happened yesterday with the UC Regents, but certainly is certainly at our forefront right now, and something we're working through with both conferences as we try to kind of make the next move here. The first time through, again, I was kind of early on in my career, so definitely it was a different experience, different things that were asked of us as a department and us as a staff to go through, but had kind of seen it for a little while, kind of knew it was coming. Whereas this time, it was nearly 2 years ago, we coming back from a convention in Las Vegas, and the next morning I thought I could just go to the dentist real quick, and oops, here we are, and never made it to the dentist that day. But thankfully, that was our team dentist, and he understood what we were doing. And I think it's kind of been a whirlwind since then, but it's been good, and we feel like we're in a good spot going forward.
So I will say thanks for that, Tim, too. If you have questions specifically, put them in the chat. We'll answer them kind of at the Q&A at the end of this as we get through. Hopefully, as we drive through some of this, we'll answer some of your questions. But anything specific, just drop it down in the chat. All of you have touched on some of this specific to sport. If you were a basketball school or if you were a football school, Obviously, I got to experience a transition at SFA, going from the Southland to the WAC, which significantly impacted lots of things, right? Travel, what that looks like, what your footprint looks like. And there's driving factors, positive and negative, for any time that there's a realignment. Outside of just whether it's basketball or football, what are some of the biggest driving factors that really pushed you guys towards alignment? Were you part of those conversations, or looking back on it, what are some things that you wish you had known when this had happened or had to consider as well? So couple part questions, take from that whatever you may. And Sharon, I'll let you answer first.
For me, Brandy, I wasn't as involved with the finance side when we were realigning or creating the new Big East. Again, like I said, it was our campus CFO who mainly handled that. And so it didn't really touch our finance department much at all until we actually made the move. And at that time, then we had, we did have to look at how we were scheduling, because it was different now. We didn't have 16 teams anymore. It was quiet for our business people. We actually brought all our business people together at one point just to see how it was affecting us. And it didn't really affect us a lot in our business office.
Anybody else want to grab that one?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I think the position we're in the G5, we don't really dictate some of these moves. I think we get into situations where things are happening sort of, there's sort of a tier in Division I athletics, and the P5, P4 moves that they make affect downstream. And that's sort of where we were. Our decision, we were happy in Conference USA, but when the American lost 3 teams to the Big 12, there was an opportunity to present itself to be in a league that had better TV exposure, that had, championships on sort of the mainline, ESPN or what have you. And quite frankly, the dollars were better. Now there's all kinds of things, and Chris could speak to this in terms of, the dollars are here, but the expenses you take on now being in kind of a multi-coast conference for them. But for us, it was really an opportunity to sort of maybe move to a brand that was more established, or maybe our fans felt more comfortable with some of the schools that we were in the New American. I think I mentioned when we talked, we've really never had a rivalry in our league, and now we're in a league with East Carolina, and that's a big deal to our fans, a big deal to their fans, because now they're in a situation. We have sort of the Power 5 schools or what have you in the state, but then you have Appalachian State, ourselves in East Carolina as FBS members. To be aligned with one of them and have an opportunity to sort of grow those rivalries is something that was pretty attractive to us.
Great perspective. What about you, Chris?
I think in both cases, as I look back at it, probably obviously exposure, it was a big one, probably in different ways. Certainly at the time, BC, exposing, growth for the campus and the institution to a different part of the country where applications were growing. I think that was a big part of it. Certainly finances, right? We'd be silly not to say that finances aren't part of that. And then just in making sure there's alignment and seeing kind of where, to take a hockey analogy here that we don't have much of is to see where the puck is going and seeing what's happening here. I think those 3 things were part of it then, and certainly part of it now. The exposure now is, I don't think UCLA has an exposure concern, but it's certainly exposure for our student athletes in this new world of college athletics, and they'll be seeing east to west kind of a lot more than they had previously. But the other aspects obviously are a big part of kind of where or what helped guide some of those decisions.
After each of those decisions were made, and again, I don't know that everybody has to answer. We can jump in and you may have similar answers too, but as after those decisions were made, so maybe you were involved on the front end, or you weren't on the back end, or maybe you did some analytics to help support how this was going to go, what it would look like fiscally. What were some of the things that the conversations around student athlete impact and experience, and especially when it comes to travel? What are some either analysis that you did, or what are the conversations that were had specifically around travel and the financial piece of it?
Sure. I guess I can start with that one. It's certainly something we've gone through a lot in the last 2 years. since the announcement, and it's something that we took obviously very seriously, and trying to keep the student athletes at the heart of all decisions, and knowing that they're not necessarily traveling regionally anymore, but they're traveling more. So, we've convened multi-department meetings, went through a real new strategic plan, quite honestly, with over 100 stakeholders across the department, across campus, including student athletes, to understand what their needs, desires are. Certainly reached out to sleep experts on campus, some travel experts, some sports scientists that we have access to here to help guide some of our decisions and what it's going to look like. We've had conversations, obviously, with campus, with the regents and different folks, to see what are the concerns that we are thinking about. What are we going to do? A lot of the things that were imposed on us are things we were going to do anyway, but the nutrition aspect, the mental health aspects, things that are top of mind anyway, and just are going to be enhanced. And now we have some resources to enhance that experience for our student athletes, and we'll certainly keep that. As we go forward, we have different metrics, and part of our strategic plan is to make sure we reach those as we go forward.
It's great.
Yeah, Brandy, I think for us, one of the big concerns we had is when we split, we actually lost some natural rivalries, which of course that affected us financially until we decided to start playing those games as non-conference games, especially losing the Syracuse game. It was very, very impactful financially. But one of the biggest things that we were concerned about, I think, for the student athletes is that when we split, we did not have enough teams. Okay, we had the old Big East went to American Athletic. Yes, they named themselves the American, and then the old Big East. But we did not have enough teams in field hockey or women's lacrosse on either side to sponsor a championship. So we had to create affiliate memberships to be able to keep those championships available for those student athletes. That was really, really a big concern. And it even is now, because as you have a team leave or a school goes to another conference, and you got to go back and find another team to replace the one you're missing so that you can continue to sponsor those sports as championships. But that was our distance of traveling. We did have to start going out a little bit more into the Midwest when we added Creighton, Xavier, and Butler, where before our footprint was pretty much the East Coast. So that that added a little more travel expense, but again, not going all to 16 schools helped balance some of that out.
That's great feedback. I'll ask when you talk about other expenses, and I think, Darren, you're actually, when we talked previously, you mentioned on that there's impact on expenses, right? Like there's travel expense, there's now expectation for nutrition and all the things that you talk about if you're going to be on the road and you're expanded. But you actually talked even about the transfer impact. You want to speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there are a lot of things you got to evaluate. We also did some of this during COVID, right? So we made some assumptions. There's some things that have happened in the travel industry, whether it's, tightening of charter access, whether it's, bus companies that went out of business during that period of time and trying to get kind of back to speed. So everything along with inflation, when those things kind of come into play, maybe change the metrics a little bit. When we went from Conference USA to the American, it didn't change our footprint so much. We were still pretty stretched out over Texas, Florida, up to the Carolinas. But what did happen is the American has more of a philosophy of kind of an additional rest day. So we played a lot of Conference USA basketball. We played on Thursday and Saturday. We're playing on Friday, Sunday. So it was just if we're going out to UTSA, we play El Paso at the same time. It's a Thursday, Saturday type of deal. You take them out, they come back. On Sunday, we would chart them back from there. The American's more of going to be a Tuesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, that type of thing. So now you're taking teams out, they're coming back, and then they go out again. So there's demands there. But I think, as specifically mentioned the transfer portal, depending on kind of where you are in the ranks, so to speak, and it's happening everywhere, right? Every school is dealing with the transfer portal, dealing with NIL, those type of things, all the different things that really weren't in existence maybe, 5 years ago. What you're dealing with now is totally revamping rosters. So, our men's basketball team might bring in 3 or 4 people a year, like most. Well, now the visits, become virtually unlimited, and you end up with, we're going to probably have 8 new players on our team this year. Our baseball team, it wasn't just portal related. Some of it's just our philosophy. We brought in 31 new baseball players this year. So all these things do factor into expenses that in the past you kind of, your coaches are going to recruit here and this time, things like that. Now we just had to transition our women's basketball program. We're probably going to bring on 8 to 10 new players between about 2 weeks ago and then through the summer. So all those things really, you're doing things last minute. You're doing things that you wouldn't normally be doing in this cycle. I think it's really been difficult in the environment we're in with an inflationary environment to be able to do as good a job projecting that as maybe we used to.
Speaking to that specifically, Chris, I'm going to ask you is like, how do you, as you're making this transition, and there are a ton of changes, and Darren even brought in, the unlimited visits and all of those things. Obviously, there's a fiscal impact, but how do you set expectations for coaches?
I mean, we still have a budget, right? And we still have to work through that, right? So I think, that's always our stopgap on that. But understanding that, I think it's really being deliberate and intentional for our coaches about what fits for them going to now a conference that's more national than regional. And student athletes certain student athletes didn't necessarily sign up for this, but the last couple of recruiting classes knew what they were signing up for and where we were going. So it's being aware of it and certainly understanding it. And I think a lot of that transition is just natural across the board, but it's a hidden, when you're getting into transfer costs and the additional visits and stuff like that, especially if there are coaching turnovers. I think there are some more hidden costs that you have to be aware of. Travel ones are obvious, right? Like we can kind of have a general sense of what a trip is going to cost us now going forward. You don't really know until you're in it, but some of those hidden ones are going to sneak up on you. But we just have to be intentional about it and have those conversations with our coaches on the front end.
For sure. And some of those changes are, there's some unanswered questions that still exist out there, and the impact on all the schools. And, sometimes decisions are made and then things change, right? So I think you'll continue. You said rumors are out there. You'll continue to see some additional changes that continue to happen because there is a trickle down effect as well. Opportunities open at higher conferences, and smaller schools then have to try to make their way up. I will, one of the factors that we talked about, like I know when we were at SFA, one of our driving factors was RPI for basketball. That was a big one out there. It was also exposure to a new area outside of just Texas and being able to be on the West Coast and some of those schools that we now have exposure to. Given that, I don't think that UCLA has an exposure issue. Everybody knows who UCLA is, but Darren, how do you think that your changing conferences impacted exposure, and even in the new Big East that you call it, Sharon, the old Big East that you called it, Sharon? How do you think those changes really impacted, maybe from an institutional level, exposure?
Well, I think I'm sorry,
no,
Darren.
go, Sharon. Go.
I just real quick, I think like for George for the Big East, the new Big East, just having the exposure on FS1, a new network. It was great. They gave us a great sponsorship deal for the basketball schools. So financially, it was probably the best thing for us to do. On campus, I don't know, because we lost so many schools that we were playing before, where people would come, if it weren't to see Georgetown, it would to see the other Big East schools. Well, we lost West Virginia, we lost Pitt, we lost a lot of those schools that drew a lot of fan base. So of course that means dollars. And it was a little struggle in the beginning, but I think now they've done so well that it's coming back up. The tournament's been a success. The last couple of years it's sold out each year. So the financial part is starting to get better. And it's getting more, the whole Big East Conference is just getting more exposure, I think, now, because it seems like we've got the right teams in there and they're doing a pretty decent job.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we came up with 5 other members of Conference USA. So those are really markets for us. We also joined, SMU is new for us, but we're in the Dallas market anyway with North Texas and Tulsa, we'd been in the league briefly with them in Conference USA. So, there were a few new faces, Wichita State, certainly for us, East Carolina, I mentioned that earlier. I think it's the brands, the brands in the American are probably resonate more with our fan base than maybe some of the brands that were in Conference USA. And that's not a knock on Conference USA. It's just that, in many cases, your fans do sort of align with programs sometimes that have some history that they didn't resonate as much with some other schools. But for us, I think being with some institutions, it's more of a metro-oriented type league. I mean, most of the schools are in, with the exception of East Carolina, most are in major metro areas. So, it's not quite the same mixture of schools, but it is, I think it's been good for the institution. We've had success. We've actually won 5 championships in the American in our first year. So I think that as much as anything, bringing schools in here and having success, and maybe from a branding standpoint, our fans maybe understand them better or relate to them better, and having that success, just it has been really good for us. And exposure, like Sharon mentioned it, Chris knows it. Obviously, they're getting into a major exposure now on the East Coast that they didn't have maybe in the past. I did do Pac-12 up at night on the East Coast, sometimes watch games, but it's going to be different for all of us. And I think again, from our standpoint, maybe we didn't change markets, but we did change some fan interest.
Awesome. Thank you. What about, Chris, this one's more poignant for you. Sharon, got to move with a group of schools, and Darren got to move with a group of schools. And then SFA moved with a group of schools. You kind of made a solo move, kind of right there in you were kind of the first that did some of that. How important during that process was it with communication with the institution, also with your peers? And then how valuable were your relationships? I'm going to toot CABMA's horn a little bit. How valuable were your relationships making that move? And how did you lean on those people?
Yeah, no, I think the relationships have always been helpful. Looking back at the first move with BC to the ACC, I think we had gone so far and then had to pause it for a little bit when Virginia Tech and Miami went, and we didn't. But then kind of re-engaged, kind of quickly right after that, and we're able to do some due diligence and some research and some understanding about where we were going, how we were doing it. We were taking, I had the ability to go on a couple of like hotel visits, right, and just to meet some contacts and see some schools as we were going through the process, which was obviously super helpful. And then this time through, obviously had a little bit. We had a travel partner, right, and with SC, and really collaborated a lot with them. Did a lot of stuff with them early on to understand how we were going to go through this conversation, and how we were going to go through the transition. And then with the 2 later additions, kind of jump them, fill them in quickly, and kind of work through. And it helps your network, quite honestly, right? Because Oregon and Washington had someone that could lead on with us in SC. We had certainly a lot of contacts. I've leaned on Tim McCleary a lot, certainly as we've gone through this transition to the Big Ten. But it's been great. I mean, everybody's been super helpful, and it obviously makes the transition the unknown a little more familiar.
When it comes to messaging, we're internal messaging, we talked about your coaches, that we still have a budget and we now have to do that. What were some of the external messaging that went out that maybe were misnomers or things that you heard? Obviously, all the rumors flying around. Do you think that there are any, looking back, are there any messaging pieces of this that you would have done differently as an institution? Obviously, we're not in that seat. We're in the CFO chair. But is there anything that you would have liked to know going into that? Or could you give yourself a piece of advice had you had to do this again? What would you tell yourself now going through this that would have helped you navigate it a little easier?
I think from my end, and I think a lot of us live this on a day-to-day basis, it's to be prepared for anything, right? And I think you got to be comfortable with the uncomfortable or the unknown. and just be aware of what's going to come, because those budgets you want to create and spend so much time in creating can change on a real quick, and as ours did, and as many do, and it's just making the most educated decisions you can possibly make in those. But certainly from this chair, with both of the changes, it's understanding, you've got to be flexible and malleable and understand where you're going, and make sure you have the whole picture, to be able to make the best decision for yourself, the department, or the institution.
Randy, I think Chris hit it right on the head, because the decisions are being made above us, and you just got to be ready when it comes down, to do what you have to do to be successful, to help your program be successful.
Well, and I think that's positive message, especially if there's younger people in there, that oftentimes you want to be in the room, like you want to be part of the conversation. You want to know there's things that you're just not going to know, because it's not for everybody to know when that is happening. And sometimes you feel left out, but in the CFO chair, you've got to deal with it when it comes, right? Hopefully you're be able to have some relationships, but as you're younger and growing, just know that you're not always going to be part of those conversations. You're going to kind of know on the impact, your job's to fix it on the back end. So I do think that's helpful and valuable. Darren, you got any advice that you would give your previous self through this transition? You went one way and came back again and did it all over. Were you involved in those conversations, or did you kind of find out afterwards?
No, I was involved with them, but I think, a little bit kind of the train left the station a little bit. So it's really about sort of figuring it out as you go along. And again, there's unknowns here. When you make an initial decision, we've had this happen. When we came back to Conference USA the second time, it was a very different looking conference. And then it was a much different looking conference by the time we actually arrived. So we had wanted that sort of like, wow, we're back in, league here with East Carolina. Well, then they left, and some other schools had made decisions during this period of time too. So, I think as much as anything, the flexibility, I think, Sharon and Chris both kind of hit it on the head. You've got the decisions are made above you. You can have input. I don't know if anything that I'm going to throw it, out and going to go like, no, we're not doing this. This is not, this can't happen. I think you adapt. And again, we've made the steps we've made have been, financially advantageous to do, but there's all these other things that people talked about. Like, we're not in a situation like where Chris is or Sharon is, where you're sort of really expanding the footprint of your league. We sort of have been in our own, even when in Atlantic 10, we're all in sort of the East. So, those kind of things like student athlete well-being and travel and things like that really didn't change a lot for us. So it really was sort of decision to sort of got, move onward, upward.
For sure. And as you see, lots of people changing across, some of it's going to impact them heavily, and some of it'll streamline a little bit of what they're doing. Tim threw a question there. I don't know if you guys saw, that's like, are there any specific concerns or misinformation that needed to be addressed, or to coaches or to leadership, like perceptions from the media? Because Chris, I know you're, some of this gets out ahead of the media. Some of it's true, some of it's not true. And were there any in that transition, anything that had to be addressed internally or even externally to set the record straight?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be that information out there. You just have to do your best and control your narrative as much as you possibly can. I mean, in terms of expectations, I think at this institution, it's to win. I mean, we have 123 national championships, and that's kind of understood when our coaches take this role. So that doesn't change. Campus leadership, again, they're going to want to compete. So it's it's education for sure, but you can't. People are going to say or do what they want, and you can only provide the facts and let them kind of go with it and educate kind of as you go along with it.
This is information is just part of it, right? Like that seems to be probably more
these days. Yeah, these days everyone with a Twitter or an X account is a reporter, so you just kind of run with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Randy, I was gonna say it's really more internal. Some for us. I mean, we're not like when UCLA makes a move or Southern Cal. I mean, that sort of dominates the airways or what happened in the Pac-12. But our transition was, while it was covered and discussed, it didn't dig a lot into that type of thing. What we had to deal with more internally is that, coaching salaries in the American are higher than the Conference USA. There are other, operational budgets in general are higher in the American than they are in Conference USA. So our coaches look at this and go, wow, this could be an opportunity to really kind of move the mark in whether it's assistant coaching salaries or head coaching salaries. And what we sort of, assess is like, look, we kind of ease our way into this league. We don't become full members from a financial distribution standpoint initially. So while it's still better, there's some other things that kind of offset that. We had to, under Conference USA rules, we had to leave our last 2 years of distributions on the table in the league. So that's something that sitting in my chair, I go, oh gosh, what am I going to do here? And then we also had to, have entry into the American. So that's a pretty big nut when you put it all together. And, I kind of explained to our coaches is like, this is not, no one turned on like this fire hose of cash here. There's some other things we've got to do as for make this transition. Things will eventually get to where we want to be, but it's not overnight. We didn't become equal in every way when we made the transition.
I think that's very valuable. I think that, educating your people, right? Like being somewhat transparent about like, hey, this doesn't just flick of a switch. We're not there and have those dollars. It's going to take some time to adjust and to get there. But I would say from personal experience too, educating campus, right? Like as you're a small school supported heavily by institutional support, what that looks like. Is this move going to cost them more money? Is this move going to, and trying to set some of those expectation on campus, right? Like where the impact of UCLA is very big. The impact of an SFA or an Austin P, it looks a little bit different, right? Because it's a majority institutionally funded. And that impact, then you have professors or faculty and staff that say, oh my gosh, we have to, we're now going to give them more money, when in reality, we're going to try to have different revenue games, generate revenue in a different way, but also the impact of the institution having presidential support was super important in that for the exposure piece that we talked about earlier. But what are some things that we're maybe leaving out that are super valuable? I mean, Sharon, you're a little bit of a smaller school in comparison in that too. What are some things that we're forgetting that may be super important to and impactful on a campus or in a department that we haven't talked about?
Well, that's a good question, Brandy. Because I guess there's always so much. For us, wow. For us, I think that the biggest impact was the financial gain of the sponsorship that the Big East got. I mean, we did, like I said, we got a really good sponsorship deal with Fox. So financially, it didn't really bother us. Yes, we had to leave money on the table when we left the old Big East, the whole group. We left, but we were able to keep the rights to play at Madison Square Garden, which is very important for the Big East Conference. We got the rights to keep the logo and all the marks. We had the historical data. I think both schools were able to keep both conferences were able to keep the historical data up to 1979, and then everybody goes forward with their own. We did leave all of our basketball units, except for the ones for the schools that were in the group of 7, got to take their basketball units. But that was it. And we did, like, again, I said we didn't have to pay any of the exit fees. But that's something I think that really has to be thought about when this is going on. The only thing is we don't get to sit in that chair to think about that kind of stuff. We just kind of manage it after it's all over. But again, for I think most of our schools, it was good. We were hearing still we were going to get a few more schools in. That didn't happen. We're hearing it again now. So don't know if it will happen or not. But that was the main thing for us, I think.
That's a great point. Darren, I know that we talked about this a little bit before, but you'd mentioned something about 3 buckets. You want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's kind of how I view the day-to-day, at a place like Charlotte, where you certainly have donors, you have ticket buyers, folks like that who make an investment in your institution every year. You have people that you've run out, maybe raise money to build facilities. But I kind of look at it in 3 buckets. There's kind of near and dear to my heart's operations, right? So you're trying to find unrestricted dollars. You're trying to, any way you can generate dollars. That's kind of what pays the bills. And then that competes though with capital, right? And, we all want to have great facilities, want to upkeep our facilities, and those are important things too. And that's, in the past, that's probably been the two things that, you kind of, you had to sort of figure out, right? Now we're in an environment where NIL is a major factor. And so when you're talking about a school like Charlotte, maybe there's a donor that's interested in doing something in the NIL space. And obviously that's going to become a lot closer to home here as it sort of gravitates toward athletic programs, being maybe responsible in some ways. But, NIL has put in, from a donor's perspective, maybe they helped you with a charter flight last year. Maybe they helped you with some sort of a special trip. Maybe they helped you renovate a space or build dugouts, those kind of things. Well, now the pressure really is on recruiting and retention. You get the best student athletes to keep them, to be able to sort of compete in a market that's really almost free agency. So NIL is sort of this third bucket that if you surveyed our coaches and said, if you had a donor and said, I'm going to give you $20,000, I think most of our coaches say, I'll take that in NIL, instead of in the past, like, boy, would love to do something in our locker room, or maybe it would be something in, operation, whatever that might be. It's new equipment, a new piece of technology, and those sort of things. So when you're at a school, I'll say like us, and maybe a lot of schools that are, I think we all deal with it in some degree because it's all relative, it's all scope, it's different for each of us. But when your donor base isn't maybe as deep as it is at some other schools, they're making decisions based on what's the most impact. And I'm struggling to maybe pay the bills or struggling to pay, to renovate something. And, our coaches are kind of all in with, it's got to be in the NIL space if we're going to have competitive teams. And I get it. I mean, that's what we're asking them to do. We're asking them to win and compete for championships. And if you're not in that space, whether you get drugged there, kicking and screaming, it is here. And you either address it or you get to the back of the line. So I think those things all compete pretty heavily with each other right now. And the NIL is maybe the most important bucket, at least for the folks that we are dealing with on our campuses.
Either of you guys want to speak to that?
I agree.
So do I.
Yeah, for sure. NIL's been, so speaking of NIL, as you think that's right now with some of the transition, is that a huge part of the decision in realignment?
I don't know. I don't know that that's the case. I think what's driving realignment is what's always driven realignment. That's TV dollars and cable subscribers and that type of stuff. I mean, there's no secret of why the leagues that have those mammoth deals are the most attractive leagues to go to. And you're going with like resourced in some respects. And I know there's a difference in within every league, but there's certainly, I think what's driving the bus there is really this, how much revenue can we realize that we can put back into what our mission is and what we're trying to do. I think the NIL just is, it's just part and parcel to it. When you go to, if you're in a league where schools have $150, $180 million budgets, they probably have pretty healthy NIL, collectives or what have you, and you're going to find yourself, competing for that group of athletes. So you're going to have to, you can't go in there and just say, no, we're not going to go down that path. You're going to go down that path or you won't compete. And that's not an acceptable outcome for all your constituents.
So in realignment too, so I think any of you guys can speak to this as well. And you talked about it earlier. Are you intentional about identifying new rivalries and creating new rivalries as you transition into new conferences? Because Sharon, you talked about the fiscal impact of long-term rivalries that existed and then maintaining some of those in a non-conference setting. How are you intentional in creating some of those rivalries? Are there partnerships in place? Do you have conversations? Chris, any y'all want to speak to that in creating new rivalries versus ones that already exist?
Brandy, I honestly don't even know how you create a new rivalry. So I don't know if anybody does it. And maybe that's why we've continued to try to keep the rivals that we had by playing them in non-conference games. And we are continually doing that. I know when Connecticut came back in, that helped us because that does kind of create a rival for some of us or one of us. But I don't know how you go, how do you do it? I don't know.
I would just think being intentional about some of your promotions and what you invest in and location and some of the other things that do that too. Chris, I saw you come off mute. You want to chime in on some of that?
No, I think certainly, in this round for us, we're going with USC, and that's our biggest rival, right? So that goes with it. Now the two other West Coast schools in Oregon and Washington going, so there's a rivalry there, and I think just the history with some of the other historical matchups with some other Big Ten programs that UCLA's had over the years, whether it's the Purdue with Coach Wooden or some other Rose Bowl matchups that have happened in the past. I think you can rekindle some of those conversations and see what happens. First time through with BC, it was different, right? You were leaving the Providences, the Georgetowns, the Connecticut's, which were rivals and close, right? And everybody was working in that same environment. All the alums were working in New York or nearby and knew somebody. And that was, creating it. You have to be more intentional about, and I think you let the games speak for themselves. There were some early games with certain schools that kind of built up a rivalry, whether you're trying to get to a championship game or some other activities that, over time you try and develop.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that providing some, right now we've got about, 13 minutes to go. There is, let's see, Ashley, let me stop. I'm going to interrupt myself. And she said, creating a rivalry was discussed internally at Maryland prior to joining the Big Ten, specifically about creating with Penn State, ideally Rutgers also, just because of proximity. Thanks for that. I appreciate chiming in. I think that would being intentional. We had to do that now, create some new rivalries. Jumping from SFA, we lost Sam Houston going to Conference USA, and some of those, that was our longest, most storied rivalry. And then you have to create some others, and then some of them kind of naturally evolved, but other ones you were just intentional about making sure it was promoted as if it was a big game. Hopefully, traditions are created by doing something over and over and over again. So that was one of the things that we were intentional about. I was going to ask this for you guys, is somebody that is going through this. If you've got people out there, obviously we've got lots of people on the call. What is some advice that you would give to yourself? Do you have any, Val, Sharon and I did a call earlier in the week with Val Ackerman from the Big East, and she talked about being able to create a network. Are there conference-wide CFO calls that you're on currently? Do you do some of those on your own? Have you created a network within your new conference of people that you align with to kind of talk through some of the challenges? I'd like for you guys to speak that in a mentality of giving advice to some of the younger people on the call.
I think that does exist. When we were in Conference USA, we had sort of we would sometimes pass on it, but it would, every few weeks we would have a call. We'd have a Zoom. And I have some of the same relationships. Now, some of those came with us to the American. And then I had some colleagues in the American that I already knew. And, and then, like Stacey Martin's at the American. So it's really easy to sort of, reach out and get information. But we don't have a kind of a standing meeting or anything like that. But, CABMA is really just the most invaluable resource for this, right? Because, like, I've known Chris now for however many years we've been in this together. We don't really have we have some common problems, but they're just scale difference, right? Like his issues are, his coaching issues are probably measured in 7 figures or 8 figures, and mine are in 6 figures. And so it's really all scale. But, I feel really comfortable if I had something I felt like Chris could add, perspective to, he absolutely would. And so I think that's probably the most valuable piece, even outside of what we would do in our league. And having conversations in your league is awesome. Because you can talk sort of apples and apples, but being able to pick up the phone or shoot an email to any of the folks on this call or the other 100 people probably that I've made relationships with is the most invaluable tool of all of this.
That's awesome. There's some more stuff. I don't know if you guys saw in the chat, Kyle Ray put in here, benchmarking with new conference members joining the ACC to help give guidance on the expectation of broadcasting standards set by the ACC for the ACC network, since there will be new to those schools entering the league. I think that's a great one of what that looks like. Because again, this is another impact that there's some fiscal impact to setting broadcast standards. There's some cost associated with that maybe is not one of those, travel expenses that you didn't think about, but is obviously very impactful. What are some other things that you can think of? That's a great one. Tim also put in here, what type of in-person opportunities exist for CFOs and business office staff in your conferences? Is it CFO only at the conference basketball tournament, or do other opportunities exist?
Ready for the Big East. We actually have, like every other year, we'll have an in-person meeting for all of our business managers and CFOs from our institutions. And the year that we don't have the in-person, then we'll have a Zoom call or whatever, so that we all can go through whatever is relevant at that time and make sure we're all on the same page and going in the same direction, hopefully. But CABMA has been my biggest resource of information, because everybody is always so willing. I mean, all you have to do is reach out. You're going to get some answers. Might not always get answers you want, but you're going to get some answers.
Yeah, similarly, I think, in each conference I've been in, the CFO group has always had, a pretty tight community of emails. How do you do this? What are you doing with per diem, or what are these coaching salaries is always a good one that you kind of try to benchmark against. And then I think each conference has tried to meet in person at least once. Certainly Zooms make it a little bit easier now. They're more common. But yeah, certainly the in-person always helps on top of whatever you see at CABMA, which has always been great.
Yeah. One thing I would add to that, we went from a league in Conference USA, which I may get this wrong. I think there was one private school, and now we're in a league that's about even. And, information from those schools is a little hard to get in the sort of public domain, right? Whether it's, through any of your sort of public databases that might be out there. I think having relationships with those folks that are at those private institutions is really important, because I can say this, if I called Sharon and said, look, what are you paying us? And I'm gonna say, look, this is for me. This is not for me. I'm not gonna tell the world what Georgetown pays their coach or what have you. But I just, my coach is coming to me in soccer. Let's just say we both have really good soccer programs. And my coach is telling me that this is sort of the going rate or what have you, or they tell me this, that Georgetown, they're making that. Then I can say, Sharon, this is real, and she can say, yeah, no. And I'm not going to get on Twitter or X and go, guess what they're paying the assistant soccer coach at Georgetown. That is not how this works. I really do value the confidentiality, because the resources that we have and be able to build that trust, again, a lot of times because of CABMA, right? I don't run in the same circles as Sharon does and in our leagues, that sort of thing. So I would see her at CABMA, but just knowing that we're going to treat this information that we might share with each other with the appropriate amount of care is really important. Especially, like I said, I've gone to the American Athletic does a compensation survey, but I have no idea who's who and who's public and who's private, and so it's really hard to go to another database and say, okay, I think I know what school that is. But it's really important for us to be able to share information and realize that we can trust our colleagues, to take the care that it deserves.
I think that's a great point. I would say with about 5 minutes left to go, this has been really insightful. But I want you to take the last 5 minutes again and talk about one of the most impactful experiences you had in CABMA, because I think that's what ties us all together. I think we could all text one another at any moment. I think as you the value of being a past president too, right? Like, it's a lot of work while you're doing it. Some of it's thankless, but some of it's extremely rewarding, and the relationships that are built, and you learn so much. Again, you've got FCS and Group of Five and Power Five all on the call, all with similar problems, again, just at scale. But let's just speak to you guys, take about a minute or two apiece, and just talk about maybe an experience that was super impactful from being past president or president during your service, and why somebody else should do it. Sharon, you're grinning. I'm nominating you first.
Chris already clicked. He's ready.
Me?
I was laughing only because it's a kind of a tough question, because there's been so many good experiences being a part of CABMA. I can't imagine being at Georgetown University right now without CABMA. I had people to call on and talk to, should I make this decision? What do you know about Georgetown? I was previous at an HBCU for 16 years. So it was quite a bit of a jump for me. And I got to give Omar Banks props, because Omar Banks almost walked me through this. Between Omar Banks and Carla Wilson, I don't know, and again, they're like my best friends, but they came from my commitment and my involvement with CABMA. I mean, and Chris, I've called Chris before, not in a while, but I mean, like, when you want to know something, when there's people here that are so willing to help you, and it makes your day so much easier when you can reach out and get some information that you don't have. So it's kind of hard for me, Brandy, to just pick one time, because it's just been
You
great.
picked one. You said Omar. You picked Omar.
Yeah,
That's
okay,
it.
yeah, Omar.
You hurt
yeah.
everybody else's feelings, but you picked Omar.
I'm so
Got it.
sorry.
No. Good, Chris. What about you?
Yeah, I think, one thing that I've learned is that you never know. You never know where people are going to go. You never know who you're going to need or when you're going to need them, and whether it's a vendor, a sponsor, an exhibitor, a colleague. They're big school, small school. You never know, right? I'm not here if it's not for the connections I've made, and probably may have not lasted, right, in this profession for if not for those folks. And I'm going to go quickly on an aside here. Like 2 years ago at the convention, there was a breakout session on conference realignment, and I didn't go to it. And as soon as we got home, we realized we were going through conference realignment, and I think it was John Daniels and Marcus Bowman who led it. And John texted me. He's like, "Well, why didn't you come to my session?" I said, "Well, I didn't know. I had to do it right away." So it goes back to you just never know. But yeah, no, I would say the people are obviously great, just like any organization, right? Without the people, it's not worth it.
Okay, I'm gonna do what Sharon did. I'm gonna name a name, name two names. When I went to my very first CABMA was like in 1995. So I'm really old. We've got people on this call that weren't born probably at that time. But in any case, I met Greg Phillips at that event. And I also throw Jamie Pollard in there. And I didn't know what I didn't know. I mean, it's like cliche, right? And those two particular individuals really welcomed me into this fraternity, right? And I had no design on leadership or anything like that. And I was going to be somebody who went, and soaked up what I could, go back, try to use it, make relationships, that sort of thing. But really, I think the impact of that was, being able to, and they've gone and done great things, but, to have relationships with, a lot of our past presidents moved on to AD jobs and that sort of thing. And to be able to sort of, they're friends, right? They're not just somebody sitting there with a title and go, I can't call that person. Well, I'll text Jamie Pollard if it's something, I need something or want to just say hello. So I think CABMA's impact is relationship. That's what it is. We all, as I use the word scale, we all deal with exactly the same issues. They're just on different scales. And I used to make this comment, on my very first CABMA, I think I sat down with somebody from like Wisconsin Whitewater and then somebody from like Notre Dame. And we could have a conversation, even though Notre Dame probably spends more in, ice hockey than Wisconsin Whitewater spends in their athletic program. But we can talk about bus contracts. We can talk about, coaching contracts, things like that. And I think that's the, impactful, had a lot of great experiences. Any one thing, I don't know that I could pick it out, because I think, some of the social events are unbelievable. Some of the keynote speakers have been unbelievable. But I just look and just say, I walk in that room, and that's harder now probably for me, because I've been in a long time, and so much of our membership is newer. But I was newer in 1995. I was the person sitting out there. So being able to say hello to these folks and just, what's their goal? What's their plan? Why did they get in athletics? I sort of stumbled in athletics as much as anything. I was kind of a compromise candidate at one point between the central administration and the athletic department. They said, give them a shot. Well, we can't find anybody else, right? So I just think the CABMA has really allowed me, and I think, what Chris and Sharon have said as well, and what you've experienced, Brandy, it's a network. That's the impact. It's a network. of like-minded people who, can put divisional, our divisions aside. Chris is in the Power 4 or 5 or whatever it is now. Sharon's is in a great basketball league. It's not a Power 5 league, but in basketball it is. And then having a conversation with you that's been in the Southland, FCS, those type of things. It's all scale and scope, and we all wake up in the middle of the night sometimes on the same topic.
For sure. I always joke, and we've got several friends that are in Power 5 and obviously was at the FCS. And I was like, I rubbed 2 pennies together. Imagine what I could do with all your money. But just kidding. But I appreciate everybody on the call today. We've reached time. Thank you guys so much for your contributions, not only to the call today, but just for CABMA in general. You guys have been steadfast faces in the room and been open to bringing up the people that are here. And I know you guys are open for some of the people on the call to reach out to you if you do have anything. But thanks for what you've done for me. Thanks for your friendship. And then also thank you for your input on today. Appreciate all you guys that have joined, and sign up for convention. It's coming up on us quickly if you haven't. And then also, if you have a thought about it, please be interested in serving on executive committee. We always need new faces and new experiences to help us grow as a committee. Awesome. Thank you guys. Have a good one.